Las Vegas, Nevada, December 31st, the loudest night of the year in a city that never embraces silence. Across the Strip, every casino transforms into a synchronized celebration of excess. Lights flashing in choreographed sequences, champagne bottles popping in rhythm with countdowns, confetti cannons primed to rain metallic streamers on thousands of partygoers who've paid premium prices to ring in the new year, surrounded by strangers and spectacle. Inside the Aurora Sky Casino, a mid-tier property that punches above its weight during special events, the celebration is reaching its crescendo. 3,000 guests pack the main floor, crushed together in a mass of glitter and desperation and forced joy. Cocktail servers navigate the chaos carrying trays of overpriced drinks. Security guards maintain positions along the perimeter, watching for the inevitable problems that emerge when you combine alcohol, gambling losses, and midnight expectations. On an elevated booth overlooking the entire scene, bathed in purple and blue LED light, stands the man controlling this orchestrated madness. Jake Moreno, the casino's resident DJ, moves behind his equipment with the practiced confidence of someone who's commanded countless crowds. His headphones rest around his neck. His hands dance across mixers and controllers, cueing the next track, adjusting levels, building toward the moment everyone came for, the countdown to midnight. The crowd doesn't know his name, but they trust him completely. He'll deliver the perfect soundtrack to their manufactured memories. He'll drop the beat precisely as the clock strikes 12. He'll make them feel like they're part of something significant, something they'll remember and talk about and post about until the moment becomes less about the actual experience and more about proving they were there. What none of them realize, not the guests shouting along with the music, not the casino management watching from surveillance rooms, not even the security teams monitoring the floor, is that the man controlling the music has also just silenced the casino's security systems. That the countdown they're all participating in is timing something far more valuable than a musical moment. That by the time the final beat drops and fireworks fill the sky outside, $14.2 million will have already disappeared into the Las Vegas night. This is the story of the party king who turned the biggest celebration of the year into the perfect cover for one of the most audacious casino thefts in modern history. A crime that required perfect timing, inside knowledge, and the understanding that sometimes the best moment to steal is when everyone is looking directly at you. Because when the lights are bright enough and the music is loud enough, even the most obvious actions become invisible. Jake Moreno was 34 years old when he committed the crime that would define his life and destroy his career. In photographs from his performing days, he appears exactly as you'd expect a Vegas casino DJ to look, deliberately styled in ways that suggest both professionalism and rebellion. Neon jackets and colors that photograph well under club lighting, carefully maintained facial hair that broadcasts creative professional. Expensive headphones worn as much for brand identity as actual function. The aesthetic of someone who's made performing into their personality. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. Jake had been working for the Aurora Sky Casino for 6 years, building a reputation as reliable talent who understood the specific requirements of casino entertainment. This wasn't club DJing in the traditional sense. It wasn't about underground music or cutting-edge sounds or the kind of artistic credibility that matters in certain circles. Casino DJing was about reading rooms full of tourists and high rollers, about knowing when to energize and when to dial back, about creating atmosphere that encouraged guests to stay on the floor, spending money. He'd started in smaller venues, working his way through the ranks of Las Vegas entertainment with the patient determination of someone who understood that success in this city required both talent and persistence. He'd done residencies at off-strip casinos where the crowds were smaller and the pay was modest. He'd taken corporate gigs and private parties and the kind of work that paid bills but didn't build reputation. Eventually, his consistency and professionalism had earned him the Aurora Sky contract. Not the most prestigious venue on the Strip, but steady work with good pay and the kind of visibility that could lead to better opportunities. The Aurora Sky valued Jake not just for his technical skills, but for his reliability. In an industry where talent often came with attitude, substance issues, or unpredictable behavior, Jake was remarkably professional. He showed up on time, sober, prepared. He followed direction from casino management about music selection and volume levels. He handled difficult crowds without creating incidents. He'd become trusted in the way that competent professionals in any field become trusted, not because anyone specifically celebrated his work, but because he never gave them reason to worry. That trust extended beyond his performing duties. Jake had been given access to the casino's entertainment control systems, the digital infrastructure that managed sound, lighting, and visual displays throughout the property. His credentials allowed him into technical areas where the equipment lived, into server rooms where audio files were stored, into spaces that most casino employees never saw. This access was necessary for his work, but also reflected the casino's confidence in him. Jake Moreno wasn't just a DJ. He was part of the operational team that made events successful. What casino management didn't fully understand was how much Jake had learned during his 6 years of access to those systems, how he'd gradually mapped the connections between entertainment infrastructure and other building systems, how he'd discovered that in older casino properties, like the Aurora Sky, the digital networks that controlled sound and lighting were sometimes integrated with power management systems in ways that created interesting vulnerabilities. Jake had always been curious about how things worked, not just the equipment he used directly, but the broader systems that kept casinos operational. During slow periods or when setting up for events, he'd explore the technical areas he had access to, studying the equipment, reading the labels on circuit breakers and server racks, understanding how different systems connected and depended on each other. He'd noticed something that security designers apparently hadn't fully considered. The Aurora Sky's main floor entertainment systems and certain security functions shared power distribution infrastructure. This integration made sense from an engineering perspective. It simplified the electrical grid and reduced redundancy. But it also meant that someone with access to entertainment system controls could potentially affect other building systems. More specifically, Jake discovered that during scheduled special effects displays, particularly the massive fireworks shows that accompanied major events like New Year's Eve, certain systems temporarily switched to manual override modes to prevent power surges from causing equipment damage. These manual modes involve brief windows when automated monitoring systems were essentially paused, waiting to reboot once the high-draw event concluded. The knowledge sat in Jake's mind for months without specific purpose. It was just interesting information, the kind of technical detail that people who work with complex systems accumulate naturally. He had no immediate criminal intent, no active plan to exploit what he'd learned, but the knowledge existed, waiting for circumstances that would give it meaning. Those circumstances emerged gradually, shaped by factors both personal and financial. Jake's income, while decent by normal standards, was modest compared to the wealth flowing around him constantly. He worked in casinos where guests thought nothing of losing his monthly salary on a single hand of blackjack, where high rollers tipped cocktail servers more than he earned in a week. The disparity wasn't unique to him. Every service worker in Vegas experienced it. But Jake felt it with particular acuity because his work put him on display, performing for people who saw him as entertaining background rather than as a person. His financial situation had worsened over the previous year. A failed relationship had left him with debt and legal fees. Medical expenses from a family emergency had depleted his savings. He'd taken additional gigs to supplement his casino income, working himself to exhaustion playing smaller venues and private events, watching his health deteriorate under the stress of constant performance and irregular sleep. The combination of financial pressure, accumulated resentment, and specialized knowledge created the conditions for criminality. Jake began thinking about the casino, not as his employer, but as a target, a place where enormous amounts of cash moved through predictable patterns, protected by security systems he learned contained exploitable weaknesses. He started paying attention differently during his shifts, not just to the music and the crowd, but to cash handling procedures, to security guard rotations, to the patterns of how money moved from collection points to secure storage. He'd work events and observe when and how cash from slot machines and gaming tables was collected, where it was temporarily stored, when armored cars arrived for pickup. The Aurora Sky, like most casinos, generated enormous cash flow that required constant management. Slot machines alone produced millions weekly in dollar bills and coins that needed collection, counting, and deposit. During major events like New Year's Eve, when guest traffic multiplied and everyone seemed to be feeding money into machines constantly, the cash volumes exceeded normal processing capacity. This meant temporary staging areas where collected cash was consolidated while waiting for armored car pickup. Jake learned that these staging areas, essentially reinforced rooms with limited access, weren't as secure as the casino's main vault. They were intermediate spaces, protected by locks and limited entry, rather than the absolute fortress-level security applied to long-term cash storage. The assumption was that money would only be staged for a few hours during normal operations, and that the guards controlling access provided sufficient security. That assumption, Jake began to realize, might be vulnerable during the chaos of a massive event like New Year's Eve, when normal security protocols were strained by crowd management demands and the various complications that emerge when thousands of intoxicated guests celebrated simultaneously. Jake's transformation from frustrated entertainer to planning criminal occurred gradually over months. He didn't wake up one day and decide to rob his employer. Instead, he began testing small things, observing how security responded to minor irregularities, understanding where attention focused and where it didn't, building a mental model of the casino's operational rhythms that went far beyond his official duties. The idea that would eventually cost the Aurora Sky Casino over $14 million began forming in Jake's mind around October, 2 months before New Year's Eve. He started thinking about how the biggest party of the year, the event where he'd be most visible, most trusted, most essential to the casino's operations, might also provide perfect cover for something nobody would expect. How the chaos and spectacle and overwhelming sensory assault of a New Year's celebration might mask activities that would be obvious under normal circumstances. Jake understood something fundamental about human attention. When a loud enough stimulus exists, everything else becomes effectively invisible. When music is thundering and lights are flashing, and crowds are screaming, and fireworks are exploding, even trained security personnel struggle to maintain comprehensive awareness. The brain simply can't process everything simultaneously, so it filters, focuses on the most apparently important elements, and trusts that normal patterns will continue. What if, Jake thought, he could exploit that limitation? What if the countdown to midnight, the moment everyone would be watching and no one would truly be seeing, could be weaponized? What if the very thing that made him valuable to the casino, his ability to control the atmosphere and timing of the biggest night of the year, could be turned against them? The plan began taking shape with the kind of detail and patient preparation that separates successful criminals from those who fail through impulsiveness or insufficient planning. Jake started working through logistics, identifying requirements, understanding what he could accomplish alone and where he'd need help. He began testing the limits of his access, staying late under legitimate pretexts, exploring areas adjacent to his normal working spaces, understanding exactly what was possible and what remained beyond his reach. During one late-night session, supposedly synchronizing audio files for an upcoming event, Jake discovered something crucial: an unlocked side door leading from a maintenance corridor to an electrical substation panel room. The door should have been secured. It accessed infrastructure that unauthorized persons shouldn't touch. But in the reality of a busy casino where hundreds of employees move constantly through service areas, sometimes security protocols degraded. Someone had left the door unlocked, perhaps for convenience, perhaps through simple negligence. The substation room contained the electrical panels that distributed power across multiple casino systems. Jake, who'd been studying building infrastructure with obsessive attention, recognized immediately what he was looking at: the circuits that supplied the main floor entertainment systems, but also the connections to other building functions, including certain security elements tied to the same power grid. More specifically, Jake identified the panel section that controlled power to the upper staging vault level, the secure area where collected slot revenue was temporarily stored awaiting armored car transfer. The security cameras monitoring that area drew power from circuits that, due to the building's age and incremental renovations, were part of the same distribution system Jake could theoretically access through entertainment system controls. The vulnerability was clear. If Jake could trigger a controlled power interruption to that specific circuit, the security cameras monitoring the staging vault would lose power, reboot, and experience a gap in coverage. The gap would be brief. Backup systems would engage within minutes. But brief might be enough if someone was prepared to act during that exact window. Jake took photographs of the substation panels with his phone, documenting circuit labels and switch configurations. He began researching electrical systems, learning about power distribution and circuit protection, and how to trigger localized interruptions without causing building-wide problems that would immediately draw attention. He studied the timing of backup system engagement, understanding exactly how long it would take for security monitoring to restore after a power event. The technical knowledge was one element. The other element was more human. Jake would need accomplices. He couldn't be simultaneously performing on the main floor, maintaining his cover as the trusted DJ running the New Year's celebration, and physically stealing cash from the staging vault. He needed people who could act during the window he created, people he could trust not to panic or fail or betray him afterward. This requirement forced Jake to make choices that would ultimately prove his downfall. Crime is easier alone. No one to betray you, no competing agendas, no need to split proceeds or manage personalities. But some crimes require coordination, and Jake's plan demanded that someone else handle the physical theft while he remained visible, establishing an unshakable alibi. Jake spent weeks choosing partners. He needed people with casino access, known reliability, nerves for felony theft, and the discipline to avoid obvious lifestyle changes afterward. He picked two old friends, Marcus Chen and David Rodriguez, 36, who'd worked with him years earlier and now drove delivery routes for vendors supplying casinos. Their vendor badges and routine presence made them effectively invisible to security. Jake rebuilt their friendship slowly, drinks, catching up, complaining about low pay, testing whether they'd even consider a desperate plan. Once he judged them willing, he revealed the scheme with methodical detail. A New Year's Eve power interruption he'd create, the staging vault location, and the 3-minute window Marcus and David would use to enter via service entrances with their vendor IDs, carry cash out in equipment bags, and blend back into the chaos. The plan's linchpin was a cloned entry card. During a gig, Jake engaged a facilities manager long enough to scan the manager's access badge with a small RFID reader. From that capture, he programmed a blank card that would open the vault. Marcus and David balked at the risks, but Jake walked them through contingencies. The holiday chaos as cover, fireworks blame for the outage, precise timing, and most convincingly, his own willingness to be the most exposed person in the room. Jake's promise to perform on stage at the crucial moment, accepting instant visibility and personal risk, convinced them the plan was carefully engineered and worth joining. The three men spent weeks preparing, meeting at Jake's apartment to review details, rehearse timing, and ensure everyone understood their roles completely. Jake built a detailed timeline, accounting for every minute from the moment Marcus and David entered the casino until they would exit with the stolen cash. They studied maps of the Aurora Skies service corridors, memorizing routes and backup paths in case primary approaches were blocked. They sourced the equipment bags they'd use, professional-grade cases that would appear legitimate if anyone happened to see them. Jake also made them memorize the rule that would prove most important. After the theft, they'd maintain absolute discipline about spending. No sudden purchases, no lifestyle changes, no behavior that might suggest unexpected wealth. They'd launder the money gradually through small business transactions, real estate purchases under shell companies, and patient conversion that would take years but would avoid detection. The money wouldn't change their visible lives. It would just provide security, eliminate debt, enable modest improvements that could be explained through normal income. During this preparation period, Jake continued his normal casino work without any behavioral changes that might alert management. He performed at scheduled events, maintained his professional demeanor, continued building the trust that would be essential to the plan's success. He wanted no retrospective red flags, nothing that would make investigators think, we should have noticed something was wrong. As December arrived and New Year's Eve approached, Jake initiated the final technical preparations. He began testing the power interruption mechanism, conducting small-scale experiments during regular work to ensure he understood exactly how to trigger the localized blackout he needed. During a November event, he briefly cut power to non-critical entertainment systems, supposedly troubleshooting an equipment issue, watching how security responded and how quickly backup systems engaged. The casino's technical staff attributed the brief interruption to equipment malfunction, documented it, and moved on without suspecting deliberate testing. Jake also began establishing patterns that would provide cover for his actions on New Year's Eve. He started regularly accessing the substation panel room during late-night work, making his presence in that area routine enough that if anyone happened to see him there on the critical night, it wouldn't seem unusual. He'd enter carrying equipment, spend a few minutes ostensibly checking audio system power connections, then leave. The behavior became normalized, filed away by anyone who noticed as just another aspect of Jake's thorough approach to his technical responsibilities. By mid-December, the plan had evolved from theoretical concept to operational readiness. Marcus and David had secured their delivery schedules for New Year's Eve, ensuring they'd have legitimate reasons to be in casino service areas during the optimal window. Jake had refined his power interruption technique to the point where he could trigger it with split-second precision. The cloned access card had been tested on low-security doors around the casino, confirming it functioned properly. The final piece was psychological preparation, ensuring all three participants understood the magnitude of what they were attempting and remained committed. Jake held one final meeting in his apartment on December 28th, 3 days before execution. They reviewed the entire plan one more time, addressed any remaining concerns, and made a pact. No contact between them after the theft until sufficient time had passed that communication would seem natural. No discussing the crime over phones or digital channels that might be monitored. Absolute discipline about spending. Jake emphasized that the most dangerous period would be the first few weeks after the theft. That's when police attention would be most intense, when any unusual behavior might trigger investigation, when they needed to appear completely normal despite possessing millions in stolen cash. If they could maintain discipline through that initial period, if nothing linked them to the crime, in those crucial early days, the likelihood of ultimate success increased dramatically. As December 31st arrived, Jake experienced not anxiety, but a kind of focused calm, the same mental state he entered before major performances. He'd prepared completely, considered every variable he could control, and understood that at a certain point, you stop planning and start executing. The New Year's Eve celebration would be the largest event of his career, and if everything worked according to plan, the last event where Jake Moreno performed as himself rather than as a criminal in hiding. December 31st, 11 p.m. The Aurora Sky Casino had transformed into controlled chaos. 3,000 guests packed onto the main floor, separated into ticket tiers that determined proximity to the stage and access to premium bars. Security personnel maintained positions throughout the space, watching for the inevitable problems that emerged during these events. Casino management observed from surveillance rooms, monitoring both the celebration and the gaming operations that continued despite the spectacle. Jake Moreno stood behind his equipment on the elevated DJ booth, bathed in purple and blue LED wash, building toward midnight with carefully selected tracks that kept energy high without peaking too early. He wore one of his signature neon jackets, this one electric blue with subtle reflective details that caught stage lighting. His headphones rested around his neck. His expression showed the focused intensity of someone completely absorbed in performance, reading the crowd, adjusting levels, maintaining the delicate balance between control and chaos that defines successful event DJing. What no one watching could see was Jake's additional monitoring. The phone mounted discreetly near his equipment, showing text updates from Marcus and David, who'd arrived separately at the casino's service entrance 20 minutes earlier. Their delivery credentials had been accepted without question. They'd logged in properly, moved their van to the designated vendor parking area, and were now positioned in a service corridor near the staging vault, waiting for Jake's signal. Jake had been refining the timing for weeks, synchronizing his planned power interruption with the New Year's countdown in a way that would make the blackout appear to be part of the celebration's special effects. The Aurora Sky's New Year's package included massive fireworks displays visible through the casino's floor-to-ceiling windows, coordinated with indoor pyrotechnics and lighting effects that created a moment of overwhelming sensory intensity precisely at midnight. Jake's plan exploited that intensity. During the countdown's final seconds, when every attention would focus on the clock and the coming celebration, when indoor lights would strobe and flash in deliberate chaos, when outdoor fireworks would detonate in sequences that drew eyes toward the windows. During that perfect storm of distraction, Jake would trigger the power interruption that would give Marcus and David their 3-minute window. At 11:45 p.m., Jake sent the prearranged signal via text, a simple emoji that meant, "Ready, status confirmed." Marcus responded with the same symbol. Everything was positioned. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the countdown to reach its final minute, executing the power manipulation with split-second precision, and trusting that every element they'd planned would function as predicted. Jake continued performing, transitioning between tracks, occasionally speaking into the microphone to hype the crowd, building anticipation for midnight. To anyone watching, security, management, guests, he appeared completely focused on his performance, giving no indication that he was simultaneously preparing to commit a multi-million-dollar theft. At 11:50 p.m., Jake transitioned to the pre-countdown music selection, a building sequence of tracks designed to increase energy over the final 10 minutes. The crowd responded as expected, dancing more intensely, raising their glasses, beginning the countdown early in their excitement. Security guards shifted positions slightly, preparing for the midnight moment when everyone would be celebrating and minor incidents would spike. At 11:55 p.m., Jake momentarily left his booth, ostensibly heading toward the backstage area to coordinate final countdown timing with the casino's event manager. This was planned. He'd established this pattern during previous events, ensuring no one would find it unusual. But instead of going to the event manager, Jake diverted to the nearby technical corridor where the substation panel room was located. He moved quickly but without obvious haste, maintaining the appearance of someone handling routine technical business. The corridor was empty. Most staff were either managing the floor celebration or watching it unfold. Jake entered the unlocked substation room, approached the panels he'd been studying for months, and prepared the specific switches that would trigger his planned interruption. The timing had to be perfect. Too early and the blackout would occur before the countdown's distraction peak. Too late and Marcus and David wouldn't have sufficient time to extract the cash before backup systems engaged. Jake had calculated the optimal moment, exactly 3 seconds before midnight, when the crowd would be screaming the final countdown numbers, when the first fireworks would detonate outside, when indoor lighting would begin its programmed strobe sequence. At 11:58 p.m., Jake returned to his booth, having been gone less than 3 minutes, brief enough not to create concern, long enough to prepare the power manipulation. He resumed performing, cueing the final countdown tracks, watching the clock on his equipment with the same attention he'd given hundreds of previous performances. At 11:59 p.m., Jake initiated the countdown sequence, a special compilation track that incorporated a voice counting down from 60 seconds, overlaid with building music and sound effects. The crowd joined immediately, 3,000 voices shouting the numbers together, creating the collective energy that defined New Year's celebrations everywhere. The tension in Jake's chest was extraordinary, but his hands remained steady on the equipment. He'd trained for this moment, understood that the performance itself was his alibi. Any visible nervousness would be attributed to the pressure of delivering the perfect midnight moment to thousands of witnesses. At 11:59 p.m., Marcus and David moved into position in the service corridor outside the staging vault. They'd timed their approach to arrive exactly when Jake's distraction would be maximum, when the 3-minute window would begin. They carried large equipment bags, the kind used for transporting tools and supplies, that would hold the cash they were about to steal. Their vendor badges hung visibly around their necks. To anyone who happened to see them, they'd appear to be exactly what they claimed: delivery personnel conducting legitimate business. At 11:59 p.m., the indoor lighting began its program sequence. Strobes and flashes coordinated with the countdown voice, creating visual chaos that made normal observation almost impossible. Outside, the first fireworks detonated, enormous explosions visible through the casino's windows, drawing attention and temporarily overwhelming the senses of everyone in the space. At 11:57 p.m., 3 seconds before midnight, precisely as planned, Jake executed the sequence he'd prepared in the substation room. The switches he'd positioned triggered a cascading power interruption to the specific circuits feeding the staging vault level. The interruption was designed to appear like an overload from the celebration's electrical demands, the kind of technical glitch that might occur when massive sound systems and lighting effects all drew power simultaneously. The staging vault level lost power completely. Security cameras went dark. Electronic locks defaulted to secure mode, remaining locked but no longer monitoring or recording access attempts. The backup generator would engage, but its startup sequence required 2 minutes and 40 seconds before systems would fully restore. At 11:59 p.m., as the crowd screamed, "Won!" and Jake raised his arms like a conquering hero, Marcus and David used the cloned access card to enter the staging vault. The card reader, running on emergency battery backup, registered the credential as legitimate. The door unlocked. They entered a room lit only by emergency lighting, where stacks of collected slot revenue sat in wheeled carts, awaiting morning armored car pickup. At 12 a.m., as midnight arrived and the casino exploded in celebration, confetti cannons firing, guests embracing, champagne spraying, music thundering from Jake's booth, Marcus and David worked in near darkness, loading bundled cash from the wheeled carts into their equipment bags. They moved efficiently, having rehearsed these motions, taking only what they could carry while maintaining the appearance of normal movement if they encountered anyone during exit. Jake dropped the perfect beat, the track that everyone would remember, the musical moment that would define their midnight experience. His hands danced across equipment. His body moved to the rhythm. His expression showed pure performance joy. 3,000 phones captured video of this moment, Jake Moreno delivering the perfect countdown, raising his arms to the sky, the absolute center of attention. While everyone watched Jake, Marcus and David filled their bags with approximately $14.2 million in bundled bills, collected slot revenue that had been awaiting deposit, concentrated in one location due to the holiday's exceptional cash flow. They worked for exactly 2 minutes and 15 seconds, then exited the staging vault, pulling the door closed behind them, returning to the service corridors with their equipment bags. At 12:02:40 a.m., the backup generator completed its startup sequence. Power returned to the staging vault level. Security cameras rebooted, their feeds briefly showing reconnecting messages before restoring normal surveillance. The electronic locks re-engaged, logging the door's status, closed and secured as expected. Marcus and David moved through the service corridors toward the exit they'd entered through, walking with the unhurried pace of workers completing routine tasks. They passed 2 other casino employees in the corridors, busy with their own responsibilities, not questioning the presence of vendor personnel during a major event. At the service entrance, the security guard waved them through with barely a glance, his attention focused on incoming calls about various minor incidents occurring on the packed main floor. They loaded their equipment bags into their delivery van, secured them in the cargo area beneath legitimate supplies, and drove out of the casino parking structure. They separated according to plan, Marcus heading toward Henderson, David toward North Las Vegas, taking different routes to different safe locations where the cash would be hidden until enough time passed to begin careful laundering. Meanwhile, Jake continued performing, maintaining energy through the first hour after midnight, when celebrations remained intense. He played for another 90 minutes, eventually winding down as guests began leaving, some heading home, others moving to after parties or continuing to gamble now that midnight had passed. At 1:45 a.m., Jake finished his set, powered down his equipment, and began the same breakdown routine he'd followed dozens of times before. He chatted briefly with casino staff about the event's success, accepted compliments on the perfect countdown timing, and loaded his gear into his car. He drove home to his apartment, arriving around 2:30 a.m., exhausted from performance and adrenaline, but maintaining absolute composure. The crime was complete. $14.2 million had vanished from the Aurora Sky Casino during the loudest, most visible moment of the year, when Jake himself had been the center of attention for thousands of witnesses. The power interruption would be logged as a technical glitch, an unfortunate but not uncommon occurrence during high-demand events. The surveillance gap would be noted but not immediately connected to theft. The missing cash wouldn't even be discovered for another day or two, when accounting departments reconciled holiday revenues and noticed discrepancies. Jake had pulled off what he'd spent months planning, a perfectly timed theft that exploited both technical vulnerabilities and human psychology, that used his visibility as cover rather than attempting to hide, that turned the biggest party of the year into the perfect criminal opportunity. Now came the harder part: maintaining discipline, acting normal, waiting for the inevitable investigation while hoping nothing would connect him to the crime he'd so carefully orchestrated. For 48 hours after the theft, the Aurora Sky Casino continued operating normally, completely unaware that over $14 million had vanished from their staging vault during the New Year's celebration. The delay between crime and discovery was exactly what Jake had predicted: holiday chaos, accounting backlogs, and the assumption that any discrepancies would be explained by recording errors or delayed processing. The discovery occurred on January the 2nd, when the casino's accounting department began reconciling slot revenue collections against expected totals based on machine monitoring data. The numbers didn't match. Specifically, approximately $14 million collected from main floor slots during the New Year's weekend appeared to be missing from both the armored car pickup logs and the internal vault transfer records. The initial assumption was clerical error. Perhaps the cash had been logged incorrectly. Perhaps it had been included in a different transfer batch. Perhaps the discrepancy reflected some combination of timing differences and documentation mistakes. But as accountants dug deeper, tracing every transfer and cross-referencing all documentation, the conclusion became unavoidable. The cash had been physically removed from the staging vault without any authorized record. Casino security was immediately alerted. The surveillance team began pulling footage from the staging vault area during the relevant time frame, expecting to find evidence of internal theft by authorized personnel. What they found instead was a complication. The security cameras monitoring the staging vault had experienced a power interruption during the midnight countdown, creating a gap in coverage from approximately 11:59:57 p.m. until 12:02:40 a.m. The gap itself wasn't unprecedented. Power events occurred occasionally during high-demand periods, and the casino's electrical infrastructure was old enough that minor glitches were considered normal. But the timing was extraordinarily suspicious. The only significant surveillance gap in weeks had occurred during the exact window when millions in cash had vanished. Investigators began examining the power interruption itself, pulling electrical system logs and consulting with facilities managers about what might cause such a localized outage. The conclusion was technically ambiguous. The interruption could have been caused by overload from the celebration's electrical demands, or it could have been manually triggered by someone with access to the substation panels. FBI agents were called in on January 3rd. The amount stolen and the interstate nature of casino operations made this federal jurisdiction. Agents began the systematic process of investigating everyone with access to the staging vault during the critical period. They interviewed employees, examined financial records looking for signs of sudden wealth or pressure that might motivate theft, and traced the physical security of the area. The surveillance footage from other casino areas, those not affected by the power interruption, became crucial to the investigation. Agents began reviewing thousands of hours of video, focusing on service corridors and access points near the staging vault during the midnight window. One camera, positioned at an intersection of service corridors, had briefly captured two figures moving through the area, carrying large equipment bags during the period immediately after the power interruption. The footage was partially obscured by the strobe lighting effects from the celebration bleeding into service areas, and the timestamp was corrupted by the power event. But the images were clear enough to show two people who appeared to be wearing vendor badges. The FBI focused on identifying these individuals. They pulled vendor access logs for New Year's Eve, cross-referencing everyone authorized to be in service areas during the event. The list was extensive. Dozens of delivery personnel, maintenance contractors, equipment technicians. But when agents began examining the specific timing of these access events, they noticed something interesting. Two delivery drivers, Marcus Chen and David Rodriguez, had logged in at the service entrance at 11:40 p.m., claiming to be delivering emergency supplies, but their employer had no record of authorizing any deliveries during the actual celebration hours. When FBI agents contacted the delivery company, They learned that Marcus and David had requested the New Year's Eve shift specifically, claiming they needed the overtime pay. But the company's dispatch records showed no legitimate deliveries scheduled for the Aurora Sky during the midnight window. Marcus and David had used their credentials and access to enter the casino under false pretenses. This discovery made them immediate persons of interest. Agents obtained warrants for their financial records, phone records, and known associates. The financial examination revealed nothing suspicious in the immediate aftermath of the theft. Both men continued living on their normal incomes, making no unusual purchases or transfers. But the phone records showed something significant. In the weeks before New Year's Eve, both Marcus and David had been in frequent contact with the same third person, Jake Moreno. The name meant nothing to investigators initially. They pulled Jake's background and discovered he was the Aurora Sky's resident DJ who'd been performing during the New Year's celebration. This information created initial confusion. Why would the casino's DJ be in contact with delivery drivers who'd apparently stolen millions during his performance? But as agents dug deeper into Jake's background and role at the casino, they began understanding the connections. Jake had extensive access to entertainment systems and technical areas. He'd been performing on stage during the exact moment of the theft, the perfect alibi. And according to facilities staff interviews, Jake had been seen in the substation panel area on multiple occasions during the weeks before New Year's Eve, supposedly checking audio system power connections. The FBI requested complete surveillance footage of Jake's movements on New Year's Eve. The footage showed him performing normally throughout the evening, but it also showed a brief absence from his booth between 11:50 p.m. and 11:54 p.m., supposedly coordinating with the event manager. But investigators couldn't find any event staff who remembered speaking with Jake during that window. Agents examined the electrical logs more closely, consulting with engineers about the specific pattern of the power interruption. The conclusion was damning. The outage showed characteristics consistent with manual triggering rather than overload. Someone with knowledge of the electrical system had deliberately caused the blackout that created the surveillance gap. By mid-January, the FBI had assembled a theory of the crime. Jake Moreno had used his technical access to trigger a power interruption, providing a surveillance gap during which Marcus Chen and David Rodriguez, using a cloned access card, had entered the staging vault and stolen the cash. The evidence was largely circumstantial but compelling. The phone contact between the three men in the weeks before the crime. Jake's unexplained absence from his booth during the critical setup period. Marcus and David's presence in the casino under false pretenses. The manually triggered power outage. But having a theory and building a prosecutable case were different challenges. The FBI needed physical evidence, the stolen money, the cloned access card, documentation that would prove conspiracy and intent. They needed one of the three suspects to make a mistake. Jake, Marcus, and David had all maintained perfect discipline in the weeks after the theft. They'd had no contact with each other. They'd continued their normal routines without visible changes. The cash remained hidden in locations the FBI hadn't identified. The plan was working exactly as designed. The crime was suspected but not provable. The suspects were known but not arrestable. What the three criminals didn't know was that the FBI had placed them under comprehensive surveillance. Agents were monitoring their movements, their communications, their financial activities, waiting for the inevitable mistake that most criminals make when they believe they've succeeded. The surveillance would continue for months if necessary, building a complete picture of their post-theft behavior, watching for any action that would provide the evidence needed for arrest and conviction. Jake Moreno's flawless casino heist fell apart not because of FBI brilliance, but because one partner couldn't resist the stolen money. For 2 months, Jake, Marcus Chen, and David Rodriguez stayed disciplined, living normal lives while $14.2 million sat untouched. Then Marcus cracked. He bought a used motorcycle in Miami for cash, thinking it was harmless. But the bill's serial numbers matched those from the Aurora Sky Casino theft. The FBI traced the purchase, followed Marcus to a storage unit with millions inside, and launched simultaneous raids on all three men. Agents seized over $7 million or detailed plans and a hard drive where Jake had uploaded a track called Silence Before Sunrise, a cryptic confession. With evidence overwhelming, Marcus and David cooperated, forcing Jake to plead guilty. At sentencing, Jake described his crime as changing the rhythm of the casino system, treating theft like art. The judge disagreed, calling it cold, calculated greed. Jake got 23 years in federal prison. Marcus and David received 18 and 19. Only half the stolen money was ever recovered.